Gunfire echoed through the dusty streets of Redemption Creek as Ruby Taylor stood defiantly on the wooden platform, her hands bound but her spirit unbroken, facing a town that had already decided her fate before she could speak a word in her defense. The year was 1878, and the Montana Territory remained as untamed as the wild horses that roamed its plains. Ruby had arrived in Redemption Creek 6 months prior, fleeing the suffocating confines of Boston society after her father's passing left her with nothing but debts and a tarnished family name. At 26, she possessed skills uncommon for women of her standing. She could read law books, debate politics, and write with a clarity that made powerful men uncomfortable. She had established the town's first newspaper, the Redemption Truth, operating from a small building at the edge of town. Her articles had started innocuously enough announcements of church socials, reports on cattle prices, and the occasional birth announcement. But as she witnessed the corruption festering beneath Redemption Creek's respectable facade, her words grew sharper, more pointed. Judge Harmon Wilson, who effectively controlled the town alongside Mayor Giles Peterson, had taken particular offense to Ruby's most recent exposé. She had dared to question the suspicious land acquisitions preceding the expected railroad expansion acquisitions that had made the judge and his friends considerably wealthier while forcing several farming families off their land. Miss Taylor has been charged with seditious writing and inciting public disorder, announced Mayor Peterson, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. The punishment for such crimes is immediate expulsion from our good town, with all property forfeit to cover damages to public harmony. Ruby strained against her bonds. The only disorder in this town comes from your own corrupt dealings. The people deserve to know Sheriff Daniels, a man whose badge seemed to grow heavier with each of the judge's commands he followed, roughly placed a hand over her mouth. "That's enough out of you, Miss Taylor." From the back of the crowd, a tall figure pushed forward. Lucas James had been watching the proceedings with growing unease. At 32, he had spent most of his adult life on horseback, driving cattle across the frontier and keeping to himself. He'd arrived in Redemption Creek 3 weeks ago, taking work at the Collins Ranch, while his horse recovered from a leg injury. He'd read Ruby's newspaper, one of the few pleasures in his otherwise pragmatic existence, and found himself admiring not just her command of language, but her courage in speaking truths, others whispered only behind closed doors. "Take your hand off the lady," Lucas called out, his voice steady despite the danger in challenging the town's authorities. The sheriff's head snapped up, hand still clamped over Ruby's mouth. "This isn't your concern, cowboy. Move along." Lucas continued forward until he stood at the base of the platform. The crowd parted instinctively. Something about his calm demeanor suggested a man accustomed to violence, though not eager for it. "I believe freedom of speech is every American's concern," Lucas said, his hand resting casually near his holstered Colt. "The lady has a right to speak her mind." Judge Wilson stepped forward, jowls quivering with indignation. "This woman has been spreading dangerous lies that threaten the very foundation of our community. We have laws against such behavior." Lucas's eyes met Ruby's for the first time, hers wide with surprise, burning with a fierce intelligence that stirred something unexpected within him. "Her voice is the only law I'll follow tonight," Lucas declared, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Remove those bonds and let the lady speak." A tense silence fell over the gathering. Sheriff Daniels had released Ruby's mouth but kept a firm grip on her arm. Judge Wilson's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. "You're making a grave mistake, stranger," the judge warned. "I suggest you consider your position carefully." Lucas smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I've considered it from every angle, and I still think the lady deserves her say." His hand inched closer to his gun. "Now, are we going to be reasonable about this, or is today going to get considerably more interesting?" Something in his tone, the absolute certainty that he would draw if necessary, made the sheriff hesitate. After a moment's deliberation, he reluctantly removed his hand from Ruby's arm. "This is outrageous," sputtered the mayor. "Sheriff, I order you to arrest this man." But the sheriff had noticed what the politicians had not. Several men in the crowd had shifted positions, hands hovering near their weapons. Not everyone in town was pleased with the judge's iron-fisted rule, and Lucas's stand had emboldened them. "Maybe," the sheriff said slowly, "we should hear what Miss Taylor has to say. Proper-like, before making any hasty decisions." Ruby straightened her shoulders, gathering her dignity despite her bound hands. "I demand a fair hearing. If my reporting is false, prove it so. But silencing me only confirms what I've written is true." Lucas ascended the steps to the platform and, without asking permission, untied her bonds. Their fingers brushed momentarily, and Ruby felt an unexpected jolt of connection that had nothing to do with her current predicament. "You'll regret this interference," Judge Wilson hissed at Lucas. "Wouldn't be the first regret I've collected," Lucas replied evenly. "But letting a woman be silenced for speaking truth? That would weigh heavier than most." As the crowd's murmuring grew, Ruby seized her moment. With clear, ringing tones, she addressed her neighbors and townspeople directly. She detailed the suspicious land deals, the threatened farmers, the discrepancies in public funds, all meticulously researched and documented. "I don't write to destroy our town but to save it," she concluded. "If we allow corruption to take root now, what future are we building for our children?" Her words resonated with many in the crowd, though others remained skeptical or hostile. Judge Wilson attempted several times to interrupt, but Lucas's steady presence beside Ruby and the growing number of supportive voices from the crowd kept him at bay. When she finished speaking, an elderly farmer stepped forward. "The Taylor girl's right about my land. Was told the bank needed it back sudden-like. Next thing I know, the judge's nephew owns it." Others began to share similar stories, and the tide of public opinion began to shift perceptibly. Mayor Peterson, sensing disaster, attempted to regain control. "These are serious allegations that require proper investigation. Until then, the newspaper will remain closed, and Miss Taylor will refrain from publishing." "No," Lucas stated firmly. "The paper stays open. The lady keeps writing." "And who are you to dictate terms in my town?" demanded the judge. "Just a man who recognizes truth when he hears it," Lucas replied. He turned to the crowd. "Folks, you've heard both sides. Miss Taylor offers evidence. The judge offers threats. Which sounds more like justice to you?" A groundswell of support rose from the gathered townspeople. Not universal, but substantial enough that the sheriff began to look decidedly uncomfortable with his position. "I think," said Lucas, "that Miss Taylor should be escorted safely home, and tomorrow we can all read her next edition with clear eyes." Ruby looked at him with astonishment. This stranger had just risked everything for her, for principles that most men paid only lip service to. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," he murmured back. "This isn't over." He was right. As Lucas escorted Ruby from the platform, Judge Wilson's cold voice cut through the dispersing crowd. "Collins, I believe this man works for you. I expect him gone by morning, or your water rights might need re-examination." Martin Collins, Ruby's neighbor and owner of the Cross Sea Ranch, shifted uncomfortably. "Lucas is a good worker." "Your choice. Collins, your ranch, or this drifter?" Lucas nodded slightly. "Don't worry about it, Martin. I was moving on anyway." Ruby felt a sharp pang of dismay at his words. This man had defended her principles at the cost of his livelihood, and she didn't even know his full name. As they walked toward her small newspaper office and adjoining living quarters, Ruby studied her unlikely champion. He moved with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his skin, his face weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes they held something unexpected. Intelligence, certainly, but also a depth of feeling that contradicted the laconic cowboy exterior. "Why did you do that?" she asked when they were out of earshot of others. "You don't know me." Lucas considered her question seriously. "I know enough. I've read your paper. You write with honesty, and that's rare enough to be worth defending. You've lost your job." He shrugged. "Jobs come and go. Conscience is harder to patch up once you've torn it." They reached her door, and Ruby hesitated. Propriety dictated she should thank him and bid him good night. But propriety had never saved anyone from injustice. "Where will you go?" "Haven't decided. Somewhere the judge's reach doesn't extend." Ruby made a swift decision. "I have a spare room. It's small. Just a storage space, really. But you could stay until you find something else." Lucas raised an eyebrow. That would raise more eyebrows than today's excitement already has. "Let them raise," Ruby said defiantly. "I'm already the scandalous newspaper woman. Might as well add harborer of gunslinging cowboys to my reputation." A smile creased his tanned face. "I don't gunslinging unless absolutely necessary." "Then what do you do, Mr. James? Lucas James? And I'm just a cowhand who believes the written word still matters." Ruby found herself returning his smile. "Then we have that in common, Mr. James." That night, as Ruby prepared a simple meal, Lucas helped her secure the building. The judge's threats weren't idle, and both knew retaliation would come. As they worked, Ruby learned that Lucas had fought for the Union in the war's final year, had driven cattle up from Texas, and had even worked briefly for a newspaper in St. Louis. "You're educated," she observed as he correctly referenced Thoreau. "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married. She made sure I knew more than just how to rope a steer." His eyes clouded briefly. "She died when I was 16. Consumption." Ruby's own losses made her nod in understanding rather than offer hollow sympathy. "My father raised me alone after my mother died in childbirth. He was a lawyer, taught me everything he knew. When he died, there was nothing left but debts. His partners had been embezzling for years." "So you came west to start fresh." "I came west because women with opinions aren't welcome in Boston drawing rooms," Ruby corrected. "At least here, if people disapprove, they do it to my face." "Like today?" "Precisely like today." She set 2 plates on the small table. "Though I admit, public censure wasn't on my agenda." They ate in comfortable conversation, and Ruby found herself more at ease with this stranger than with people she'd known for months. As the evening grew late, Lucas insisted on taking the most uncomfortable chair for his bed rather than displace her from the small back room she used for storage. "I've slept on the ground most nights for years," he said. "This chair is luxury by comparison." Ruby reluctantly agreed, providing him with blankets before retiring to her own room. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. The day's events kept replaying in her mind, along with the unexpected appearance of Lucas James. There was something about him that intrigued her, not just his timely intervention, but the man himself. He seemed to exist between worlds, educated yet at home on the frontier, gentle in manner yet clearly dangerous when provoked. Morning arrived with a crash as a brick sailed through her front window. Lucas was instantly alert, gun drawn as he moved to check the street. "Coward's already gone," he reported, holstering his weapon. The brick had a note tied to it with twine. "Last warning, leave or burn." Ruby's hands trembled slightly as she read it, but her voice remained steady. "Well, they've escalated from public humiliation to property damage. I suppose that's progress of a sort." Lucas didn't smile. "This isn't a game, Miss Taylor. These men won't stop at broken windows." "I'm well aware of the stakes, Mr. James." She squared her shoulders. "And I'm not leaving." He studied her for a long moment. "Then neither am I." Ruby blinked in surprise. "You don't need to stay. This isn't your fight." "It became my fight when I stood up on that platform." He gestured toward her printing press. You have a paper to put out, don't you? One detailing yesterday's events and this morning's threat. A slow smile spread across Ruby's face. Yes, I most certainly do. Over the next several hours, Ruby wrote while Lucas repaired the window as best he could with materials at hand. When she finished her article, he read it over, offering suggestions that sharpened her already incisive prose. Together, they operated the press, producing enough copies for the entire town. When they finished, Lucas took half the stack. I'll distribute these. You stay here and lock the door. Ruby shook her head. We'll both go. I won't hide while you take all the risks. He looked like he wanted to argue but simply nodded. Stay close to me. They walked through town together, distributing papers to interested citizens, many of whom had witnessed the previous day's confrontation. Some took the papers eagerly, others reluctantly, and some refused outright. The judge's supporters glared, but with Lucas at her side, none dared interfere directly. As they approached the general store, Ruby spotted Martin Collins in conversation with Sheriff Daniels. The rancher looked troubled as he caught sight of them. Lucas, Ruby, he greeted, nodding to each. Quite a paper you've put out today. Just reporting the facts, Martin, Ruby replied. The sheriff cleared his throat uncomfortably. Miss Taylor, I should warn you that Judge Wilson is preparing legal action for slander. Truth is an absolute defense against slander, Sheriff, she countered. Everything I've printed is verifiable fact. Be that as it may. Is there something else, Sheriff? Lucas interrupted, his tone pleasant but his eyes watchful. The lawman sighed. Judge wants me to run you out of town, James. Says you're a troublemaker. And are you going to try? The tense moment was broken by Martin Collins. Actually, I came to offer Lucas his job back. Judge Wilson be damned. Both Ruby and Lucas turned to the rancher in surprise. My land, my choice of workers, Martin continued. Besides, 3 more families came forward after reading your first article, Ruby. The judge's land schemes go deeper than even you know. This unexpected support bolstered Ruby's resolve. Throughout the day, more townspeople approached them, some with information, others with encouragement, a few with warnings about Judge's growing anger. By evening, when they returned to the newspaper office, a sense of cautious optimism had replaced the morning's fear. The people of Redemption Creek were beginning to question the authority they'd long accepted without challenge. We might actually succeed, Ruby said as they shared another simple meal. If enough people stand with us. A gunshot shattered the moment, the bullet splintering the doorframe inches from where they sat. Lucas reacted instantly, dousing the lamp and pulling Ruby to the floor. Stay down, he whispered, crawling to the window to peer outside. More shots followed, systematically targeting each window of the small building. Glass shattered around them as Ruby pressed herself against the floor, heart pounding. They're trying to scare us, Lucas said, his voice calm despite the chaos. 4 men, spread out, can't get a clear shot. My printing press, Ruby gasped, suddenly realizing their true target. As if confirming her fears, a flaming bottle arced through a broken window, shattering against the wall near her precious press. The flames spread rapidly along the oil-soaked rag trailing from the bottle's neck. Lucas moved without hesitation, grabbing a blanket to smother the growing fire while keeping low to avoid the continuing gunfire. Ruby scrambled to help, grabbing a bucket of water kept for cleaning the press. Together, they managed to extinguish the flames before they could cause irrevocable damage, but the attack continued. More bottles followed, forcing them to fight multiple fires while bullets whistled overhead. We can't stay here, Lucas shouted over the chaos. They'll burn us out if they have to. Ruby nodded grimly, gathering her most important papers evidence of the judge's corruption that couldn't be replaced. There's a back door through the storeroom. They made their way through the smoke-filled building, crouching low. Lucas paused at the back door, checking for attackers before guiding Ruby into the alley behind. Collins Ranch, he said decisively. It's our best chance. Taking advantage of the darkness, they slipped from shadow to shadow, avoiding the main streets. They were nearly clear of town when a figure stepped from between two buildings, rifle raised. "That's far enough," came Sheriff Daniel's tired voice. Lucas pushed Ruby behind him, his hand hovering over his holstered gun. "You doing the judge's dirty work now, Sheriff?" The lawman's face twisted with conflict. "I'm trying to prevent bloodshed. Judge has half the town riled up against you, too. Says the woman's a dangerous radical and you're her hired gun." "And you believe that?" Ruby demanded, stepping out from behind Lucas despite his attempt to shield her. Sheriff Daniels lowered his rifle slightly. "Doesn't matter what I believe. Law's the law. And the judge." "The judge isn't the law," Lucas interrupted. "He's just a man abusing his position. You know it. I know it. And thanks to Miss Taylor, the whole town's starting to know it." A tense silence followed as the sheriff visibly wrestled with his conscience. Finally, he sighed deeply. "I didn't see you," he said, stepping aside. "But you didn't get this from me. Judge's men are watching all roads out of town and the trail to Collins Ranch." "Thank you," Ruby said sincerely. The sheriff nodded once, not meeting her eyes. "Don't thank me. Just don't get yourselves killed proving a point." They changed course, heading instead for a small creek that ran behind the town, following it to minimize their tracks. The night had grown cold, and Ruby shivered in her smoke-damaged clothing. Lucas noticed immediately, removing his coat and draping it over her shoulders despite her protests. "My pa would haunt me if I let a lady freeze while I had a coat to offer." The simple gallantry touched Ruby deeply. "Your father sounds like a good man." "He was. Taught me that standing up for what's right isn't optional, it's just what men do." He glanced at her with newfound respect. "Though I'm thinking maybe it's what good people do, regardless of whether they're men or women." They traveled through the night, eventually finding shelter in an abandoned line shack several miles from town. The tiny one-room structure was dusty and cold, but it offered protection from the elements and prying eyes. Lucas managed to start a small fire in the rusted stove, while Ruby examined the documents she'd saved. In the flickering light, Lucas noticed for the first time that her hands were badly scraped from their escape. Without comment, he tore a strip from his relatively clean undershirt, soaked it with water from his canteen, and gently took her hands in his. "This might sting," he warned, before beginning to clean the cuts. Ruby winced but didn't pull away. His hands were calloused from work but unexpectedly gentle. The tenderness of his ministrations contrasted sharply with the dangerous man who had faced down the town's authorities. "Why are you really helping me?" she asked softly. "The truth this time." Lucas continued his careful cleaning of her wounds, seemingly absorbed in the task. Just when she thought he wouldn't answer, he spoke. "When I was in St. Louis, working for that newspaper, I saw what happens when powerful men go unchallenged. The editor, good man, fearless writer, published evidence of corruption in the city government." His jaw tightened. "They killed him. Made it look like a robbery gone wrong. But everyone knew." "And you did nothing?" There was no accusation in her voice, only understanding. "I testified to what I knew. Wasn't enough. The guilty men walked free, and He shook his head. "I left. Told myself there was nothing more I could do." He finished bandaging her hands but didn't release them. "When I saw you on that platform, refusing to be silenced, it was like being given a second chance to do what's right." The honesty of his confession created an intimacy between them that transcended their short acquaintance. Ruby found herself telling him things she'd never shared: her dreams for the newspaper, her disappointments, her fears for the future. As dawn approached, exhaustion finally claimed them. Despite the impropriety, they slept side by side near the stove for warmth, Lucas's coat serving as their shared blanket. Ruby woke first, momentarily disoriented before remembering the events that had brought them to this dusty shelter. Lucas slept beside her, one arm protectively extended across the floor before her, as if even in sleep he sought to shield her. She studied his face, relaxed in slumber, and felt something shift within her heart. This man, this stranger who had become her champion, had awakened feelings she'd long suppressed in her pursuit of justice and truth. When Lucas opened his eyes to find her watching him, neither spoke for a long moment. Something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the connection that had formed so rapidly. "We need a plan," Ruby finally said, reluctantly breaking the spell. Lucas sat up, running a hand through his tousled hair. "Martin Collins will help us, but we need more than one ally. We need to show the whole town the judge's true nature." "The evidence I saved will help, but it won't be enough," Ruby admitted. "We need witnesses willing to speak publicly." They spent the morning formulating a strategy, deciding that Lucas would approach Collins while Ruby remained safely hidden. The risk of her being seen was too great. The judge's men would be searching for her throughout the county. "I don't like splitting up," Lucas said as he prepared to leave. "Nor do I," Ruby admitted. "But it's sensible. You'll attract less attention alone." He hesitated at the door. "If I'm not back by nightfall—" "You will be," she interrupted firmly, unwilling to consider alternatives. Their eyes held, and Lucas impulsively reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "You are the most remarkable woman I've ever known, Ruby Taylor." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her with a racing heart and a strange mixture of fear and hope. The hours of his absence stretched interminably. Ruby occupied herself by organizing her evidence and drafting articles, but her mind kept returning to Lucas, his quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness, the way his rare smile transformed his weather-beaten face. She was startled from her thoughts by the sound of approaching horses near sunset. Peering carefully through a crack in the shack's wall, she saw Lucas returning with Martin Collins and, surprisingly, Sheriff Daniels. Relief flooded her as she opened the door to admit them. Lucas immediately moved to her side, his eyes quickly scanning her as if assuring himself of her safety. "Sheriff Daniels has had a change of heart," Martin explained. The lawman removed his hat, looking decidedly uncomfortable. "Judge Wilson tried to bribe me to find you by any means necessary," he explained. "Made it clear you weren't meant to survive the encounter." Ruby exchanged a glance with Lucas. "And this troubled your conscience?" "I've done things I ain't proud of," the sheriff admitted. "Looked the other way more times than I should. But murder?" He shook his head firmly. "That's where I draw the line." "He's not the only one," Martin added. "After last night's attack, folks are talking. Judge went too far." Hope blossomed in Ruby's chest. "Are they willing to stand with us?" "Some are," Martin confirmed. "Enough that we've got a fighting chance." The group spent hours planning their next move. By morning, they had devised a strategy that was both bold and dangerous. Ruby would return to town openly, protected by Lucas, Martin, and the sheriff, to host a town meeting where all evidence against the judge would be presented. "It's risky," Lucas warned. "The judge won't go down without a fight." "Which is why we need to do this properly, legally," Ruby insisted. "If we resort to their tactics, we're no better than they are." They returned to Redemption Creek the following day, riding openly down the main street to the astonishment of onlookers. Sheriff Daniels immediately posted notices for an emergency town meeting that evening, while Martin Collins rounded up supporters. Ruby was heartened to find her newspaper office damaged, but standing the fires had been extinguished before they could consume the building entirely. With Lucas's help, she salvaged what remained of her printing press and managed to produce a single-sheet edition announcing the meeting and promising revelations about the town's governance. As evening approached, tension mounted. The town hall filled beyond capacity, with citizens spilling onto the porch and street. Judge Wilson arrived flanked by Mayor Peterson and several hired guns, his face a mask of barely contained fury when he spotted Ruby at the front of the room. "This is an unauthorized gathering," the judge blustered. "I demand it be disbanded immediately." Sheriff Daniels stepped forward. "Actually, Judge, as sheriff, I'm authorized to call town meetings in emergency situations. I'd say attempted murder qualifies." A murmur ran through the crowd. The judge's face purpled. "Preposterous. Who's been murdered?" "No one, thanks to quick thinking," Lucas replied, his voice carrying clearly. "But it wasn't for lack of trying when your men set fire to Miss Taylor's building with her inside." The judge sputtered denials, but Ruby seized the moment to address the gathered townspeople directly. With clear, measured words, she presented her evidence of the judge's corruption land records showing suspicious transfers, witness statements, and financial documents revealing kickbacks. One by one, citizens stood to share their experiences, farmers forced off their land, businesses pressured for protection money, witnesses intimidated into silence. Even Mayor Peterson looked increasingly uncomfortable as the testimony mounted. Judge Wilson, seeing his control slipping, made a desperate final gambit. "This woman is nothing but a troublemaker. She came to our peaceful town with radical ideas, turning neighbor against neighbor with her scandalous lies." "The only scandal here," Ruby responded calmly, "is how long you've been allowed to pervert justice in this town." The judge's face contorted with rage. "You'll regret those words? You interfering." In a single fluid motion, he drew a concealed derringer and aimed it directly at Ruby. Lucas moved instantly, placing himself between Ruby and the gun. "Put it down, Judge. It's over." "Nothing's over until I say it is," the judge snarled, his hand shaking with fury. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. The judge fired, the bullet grazing Lucas's shoulder. Before he could fire again, Sheriff Daniels drew and shot the derringer from the judge's hand. Chaos erupted briefly, but order was quickly restored as the sheriff's deputies took control. Judge Wilson, clutching his injured hand and shouting threats, was escorted from the hall to be held for attempted murder. In the aftermath, the town voted unanimously to petition the territorial governor for the judge's removal and an investigation into his dealings. Mayor Peterson, seeing which way the wind blew, suddenly remembered evidence of the judge's misdeeds that he'd been planning to report. As the meeting concluded, Ruby found herself surrounded by townspeople offering support and appreciation. Her newspaper was hailed as essential to the community, with several businesses immediately pledging advertising revenue to help rebuild. Through it all, Lucas remained at her side, his presence a steadying force despite his painful but minor wound. When they finally had a moment alone, Ruby gently examined his injured shoulder. "You could have been killed," she said softly. "So could you," he countered. "Seems we're even." Ruby's fingers lingered on his arm. "Why did you do it? Step in front of a gun for me?" Lucas covered her hand with his own. "I think you know why." Their eyes met, and the connection that had been building between them since that first moment on the platform crystallized into certainty. "I should be moving on," Lucas said, contradicting his words by moving closer to her. "I'm not one to stay in one place long." "Perhaps you just haven't found the right place," Ruby suggested, her heart pounding. "The right reason to stay." He smiled then, a full, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "Perhaps I have now." Their first kiss was tentative, gentle, a question being asked and answered in the same breath. The second was a promise. 1 year later, the rebuilt and expanded Redemption Truth Office buzzed with activity. Ruby moved among the new printing equipment, directing her small staff of 2 young apprentices with practiced ease. The newspaper had flourished, becoming a respected voice throughout the territory. Judge Wilson had been convicted and imprisoned for his crimes. Mayor Peterson had resigned in disgrace. In their place, a town council had been established, with decisions made by vote rather than decree. Ruby paused at the window, watching as Lucas approached on horseback, returning from delivering newspapers to outlying ranches. They had married 6 months earlier in a ceremony attended by the entire town, their unlikely love story having become something of a local legend. Lucas had discovered unexpected talents as a newspaper man, his natural storytelling ability translating well to the printed page. His column on frontier justice had gained popularity beyond Redemption Creek, with several larger papers requesting to reprint his words. As he dismounted and caught sight of her in the window, his face lit with the same smile that still made her heart skip. He no longer spoke of moving on, having found in Ruby and Redemption Creek the home he'd never known he sought. "Successful delivery?" she asked as he entered, hanging his hat on the rack by the door. "Every copy," he confirmed, crossing to kiss her lightly. "And 3 new subscriptions." Ruby smiled, thinking of how far they'd come from that dangerous night when they'd fled for their lives. "Did I tell you I received a letter from the governor today? He's considering legislation to protect newspaper publishers from intimidation." "Seems your voice is being heard far beyond our little town," Lucas said proudly. "Our voice," she corrected, taking his hand. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." He drew her close, his expression growing serious. "I was just thinking about that day on the platform, when I said your voice was the only law I'd follow. I remember." "Best decision I ever made," he murmured against her hair. "Following your voice led me home." Outside their window, Redemption Creek continued its daily business, transformed by the courage of a woman who refused to be silenced and the man who believed her voice was worth fighting for.